Hey there, my wedding planning friends, and welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, thanks so much for clicking on my video. I'm Emily Summer. I'm a wedding planner based in Montana, and I make weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice. Today we're going to touch on a topic that a lot of people are being faced with this year, and that is the notion of a micro wedding. What is it? How do you do it? Should you do it? Let's dive in. So first of all, let's define what a micro wedding is. A lot of people, I think they hear a micro wedding and their mind goes to more of an elopement. And an elopement and a micro wedding are two different things. An elopement is where you typically are just the two of you as a couple and a couple people with you as witnesses, usually family members, best friends, siblings, just a couple of people as witnesses technically to your elopement. Usually there's not very many vendors involved, typically a photographer and your officiant, and that's it, maybe a florist. And then there's usually no reception, dancing, dinner, maybe like a small intimate dinner with just the two of you and your witnesses, but typically not a reception to follow where other people will join in. A micro wedding, on the other hand, is essentially the same as your typical standard traditional style wedding. It's just on a much smaller scale. So you'll still have all of the regular activities, you'll still have a full ceremony, you'll still have maybe even a cocktail hour, you'll still have a dinner, often still the same first dance, father-daughter dance, mother-son dance, all of those typical traditional activities that you see at most weddings are in a micro wedding, like I said, just on a smaller scale. So typically anything under about 75 guests would be considered a micro wedding, and you might hear that number and think that's not very micro, but when the average wedding is about 150 guests, 50 people feels like a much smaller, intimate wedding. Obviously, with COVID, a lot of people are being faced with planning micro weddings, not necessarily out of choice. However, I really like micro weddings, and I think that, regardless of the situation that we're in, there's a lot of really great benefits that come from having a micro wedding. The first of which, and my biggest pull towards a micro wedding, is that you can still have everything that you want, essentially, and be able to save money. So if you're wanting to have a really personalized experience for your guest, be able to have some maybe unique decor, really pay attention to more of those fine details that you see in those photos that you've saved on Pinterest and all those special little details that you want to incorporate into your wedding, it's a lot easier to do that when you are having to cater to a lot fewer people. So for instance, if you're wanting to have a really beautifully set table and unique style glasses, the fancier flatware, anything that's not, just your standard flatware, plateware, china, all of that kind of stuff adds up, obviously. And so when you're having a large guest count, you're paying per guest. And so the likeliness that you are able to afford those nicer settings and just those nicer detailed touches and decor touches is just not as common. Another great thing about micro weddings is your venue options are a lot more open. So when you're not trying to fit a large amount of people into a certain space, or you're having to follow certain liquor license laws or anything like that, then your venues are a little bit more open. So with a micro wedding, you can get away with having a wedding in a backyard. You can have a wedding in a national park. Here in Montana, a lot of people will use Glacier Park as a ceremony site and then do like a reception afterwards. You also have a much better opportunity to really connect with the guests that you do have present at your wedding. On your wedding day, it goes by so fast. There's so many people there, and I guarantee by the end of the night, there'll be at least a small group of people that you realize you never even got a chance to speak to, or you'll be looking at your wedding photos later and be like, oh, Uncle Frank was there and I barely even talked to him. When you have a micro wedding, there's a much greater opportunity to be able to connect with each guest. And in addition to this, you also will have a lot of really great candid captured moments as well. I had a wedding this last summer that turned into a very small micro wedding. And I remember I was chatting with the photographer there at one point, and she was like, this is so great. I think I have a candid photo of every single person at this wedding. And so you just are really faced with a lot more opportunity to connect, a lot more memories to be made. Looking back on your photos, you'll remember every single person that was there, and you can probably have some sort of anecdotal memory from the wedding day, from a time that you got to talk to them, and your photos might end up a lot more special as well. Another great bonus is that there is a lot less work involved. especially when it comes to setup. So if you're not setting up for a 200-person wedding, you don't have to set tables and chairs for 200 people. That goes for the ceremony and for the reception. This in turn also includes tear down, which is always a bonus. If you don't have that many people that you're setting up for, you also won't have that many people that you're going to have to clean up after at the end of the night. Overall, with a micro wedding, you can just really create more of an experience for you and your guests rather than a wedding that is created for a bulk amount of people. Okay, now let's talk about the planning process of a micro wedding. So like I mentioned earlier, a micro wedding is very similar to that of a traditional style wedding, and so the planning process looks a lot similar as well. Much like any other process, you would start with your guest count. So you're likely already anticipating that you're going to have a smaller guest count, so just sitting down and figuring out exactly what that number will be will help with your venue options, which will be your next step. So like I mentioned earlier as well, your venue options are a little bit more open when you have a micro wedding because you won't have to be limited to the amount of people that will fit in a venue. So you can use a traditional style venue if you would like, whether that's a church or a venue that has a ceremony and reception space built in. Or, like I said, you don't have to use a venue space at all. You can use a national park, you can use a backyard, you can use a regular park, you can use an Airbnb. I've seen that done. So your options are a lot more open when you have a smaller guest count, and you can really get creative here. So that's the first thing that you'll want to figure out is your venue. And because there's so many options, this will probably take you the longest than some of the other decisions you will have to make as far as planning goes. So make sure that you're doing this right away and nailing down the venue before you make any other big decision. The next thing that you'll want to do is hire a photographer. This is the one vendor and the one element of a micro wedding that really doesn't change versus a micro wedding or a 300-person wedding. Your photographer is your photographer. They're going to provide the same service that they would whether it's 10 people or 200, and the main difference would just be timing here. So likely you probably won't have as long of a day and as late of a day with a micro wedding than you would a traditional wedding, but everything else will remain the same as far as a photographer goes. After the photographer, that's when you'll book your florist and any rentals and decor items. When it comes to your rentals and decor, like I said before, you can be a lot more personalized and unique here and be able to splurge a little bit more on those items, specialty items that you might want for your table setup and for your dinner items that you may not have been able to with a larger guest count. So take the opportunity to be really intentional, focus on those details, and make it as personalized as you would like, and still be able to save money. You'll still need to figure out whether you plan to have a DJ or some sort of entertainment for the night. If you still plan on having a normal cocktail party and reception with dancing, then you will likely still need a DJ. Again, this will not change based on the number of people that you have. The only difference will be if you are having a shorter reception or shorter your wedding as a whole will be a shorter amount of time. That's the main difference here. Don't expect a DJ to charge you less just because they're only going to be playing music for 50 people versus 150. They're still providing the same service. I get asked this often and lately. What do you still need to hire a coordinator or a planner if you're having a micro wedding? I think a lot of people, their initial thought is, no, why would I need that for so few people? And really this is a personal preference here and really how much work you want to be putting into your wedding, especially on the day of. With a micro wedding, yes, there's less people to manage, which is always nice. However, that doesn't mean that there's less work to be done, especially on the wedding day. So many people will still hire a planner or just a day of coordinator because there's still people to be wrangling, there's still vendors to communicate with, and there's still a timeline to be created and managed throughout the day, even though there's smaller people there. So yes, go for it. Hire a wedding planner, hire a wedding coordinator if that's something that you would like to do, because there's still a lot to coordinate and to be done. I know this year has a lot of uncertainties still. I think we thought we would be in a different position planning 2021 weddings than we are right now. However, a micro wedding is a great option for a lot of people depending on the area that you're in. If you still want to plan to get married in 2021 and you don't really know how to move forward, or if you're planning on having a larger guest count and you're not sure if that's a possibility for you, just moving forward with a micro wedding and just planning for a smaller group of people might be a really great option for you. There's still so many great benefits when it comes to a micro wedding, and if you're being forced to make this decision and it's not something that would have been your first choice, keep in mind that you can still throw a big party down the road. Your first anniversary will come around and you can have a big celebration, throw the big wedding reception that you wanted to have with all those people that you wish could be there now. You'll end up saving money in the long run, and I guarantee your wedding day will still be extremely special. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, please like and subscribe to get weekly videos on wedding planning tips and advice, and we'll see you next week.